The worldwide cyber attack appeared to slow today. Since Friday, the so-called ransomware has hit more than 200,000 victims in more than 150 countries. The worst of it today was in Asia. William Brangham reports.
At a movie theater in Seoul, South Korea, screens flashed the bad news. Now playing a global cyber attack. In Indonesia, the waiting room at a cancer hospital in Jakarta was packed with patients. Their records also held hostage by this so-called ransomware.
There are always so many people. That's why it's taking so long. We're tired, but we need the treatment.
In China, state media reported some 4,000 schools were among the hardest hit there, including 2 prestigious universities.
If we pay the ransom, then we are risking having our personal information, including our account information, recorded and stolen.
Japanese giants Hitachi and Nissan were affected as well, but Japan's chief cabinet secretary said the damage was minimal. The virus first struck on Friday, primarily at hospitals in Britain and companies across Europe. This particular kind of ransomware takes advantage of a security flaw in Microsoft's Windows operating system. It locks users out of their computers until they pay a ransom to get it back. This strain of ransomware was apparently built in part using software created by the National Security Agency, the NSA, which was then stolen by hackers. Microsoft patched the flaw in its system in March, but many users either ignored it or refused to pay for it. In an open letter Sunday, Microsoft President Brad Smith blamed the NSA and called it yet another example of why the stockpiling of vulnerabilities by governments is such a problem. Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is visiting China, also criticized the U.S. amid reports that his interior ministry had been hit hard.
The primary source of the virus happens to be the intelligence services of the United States. Russia here is absolutely uninvolved.
But at the White House today, Tom Bossert, President Trump's Homeland Security advisor, said the NSA had never intended its tools to be used by foreign criminals.
That this was a vulnerability exploit as one part of a much larger tool that was put together by the culpable parties and not by the U.S. government. So this was not a tool developed by the NSA to hold ransom data.
Meanwhile, there's been political fallout. In Britain, where a general election looms, opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn and Prime Minister Theresa May traded jibes long distance.
Over the past 7 years, our National Health Service has been driven into crisis after crisis. The Tory cuts have exposed patient services to cyber attack.
Cybersecurity is an issue that we need to address. That's why the government, when we came into government in 2010, put money into cybersecurity.
The cyber attack's effects in the United States have been limited, except for damage to the FedEx delivery service. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham.
And let's turn to Microsoft now, which has been responding to this attack and criticizing the NSA for its alleged role in exploiting the vulnerability. To begin with, Brad Smith is the president and chief legal officer of the company, and he joins me from Redmond, Washington. Brad Smith, welcome back to the NewsHour. So first off, what is the status of this cyber attack? There were some reports late today about a new variant surfacing in parts of the world. What do you know about that?
Well, I think as the report just showed, things seem to be calming down a bit, but it's too early to declare victory or say that this episode is over. As you just mentioned, new variants can be created. That's not uncommon in these kinds of situations. We'll have to monitor them. And then more broadly, even as we help customers who are dealing with this particular attack, this is a wake-up call for all of us, whether we're in the tech sector, at customers, or in government. We need to do more to address this problem.
And you did say in the memo that Microsoft issued yesterday, you did say this is a powerful reminder. Everybody needs to keep their computers current and patched. But you did go on to point that finger at governments and what you call stockpiling of vulnerabilities. What did you mean by that?
Well, we've been pointing out in recent months that more and more in multiple countries, certain agencies and some governments are stockpiling vulnerabilities, meaning the flaws that they find in software, they're creating their own exploits so that they have them available. And this causes us concern. We believe the world needs some new rules to govern this. We need governments to act with restraint, and we certainly need governments that are creating these kinds of cyber weapons to be effective so that they're not stolen or get leaked out.
Well, I want to ask you about that because at the White House today, the president's Homeland Security advisor, Tom Bossert, I think you just heard him say this, he said the NSA never intended for this tool that they created to be used as part of some ransomware attack.
I think that's got to be the case. And the reality is this was an unusual attack. It involved the combination of a very sophisticated piece of software of the type we sometimes see in governments, then combined with a much less sophisticated piece of software, in effect, the ransomware component. And in all probability, it's some type of organized criminal group that took what came out of the government and put it to use in a way that no one ever intended. But the damage is still done, and we can't assume that this is the last time we'll see this type of problem if we don't find a way to take new steps.
Well, Brad Smith, what do you say about Microsoft's role in this? I'm sure you know there are security analysts out there who are saying not only because these flaws existed in something that Microsoft, that your company created, but also that the company apparently hasn't done enough to alert people that these flaws are there, that they need to patch. There are some nonprofit organizations, governments that we've been discussing that just haven't gotten around to it. And these analysts are saying Microsoft should have done more to alert people.
Well, the very first thing that I said in my statement yesterday was that Microsoft, in fact, has the first responsibility to address these issues. I think that's unquestionable. We look at everything that we're doing today. We have 3,500 security engineers. We worked over the weekend to provide help to customers around the world. We acted in March to patch software. We acted in March to talk about the importance of this, as we do all the time. But look, this is a wake-up call for us, for customers. None of us should assume that we're doing everything that we can possibly do. Let's all learn from this together. And I would be the first to say that just as government needs to do more, we need to ask ourselves what more we can do as well.
Can you say at this point what more Microsoft can do?
Well, one of the issues that I think we need to think through around the world is how to help customers, especially in sophisticated, diversified, complicated information technology environments, to deploy patches more easily. The National Health Service in the UK is a good example. It's a very large institution. Now, in some cases, the computers are a good deal older. I think there's certainly an opportunity for us to ask ourselves, what new technologies can we deploy? What new processes can we develop to make it easier for customers? And then, of course, we do need customers to act. We cannot actually patch their systems unless they deploy our technology, and that, too, is a lesson for us all.
I want to go back to what you were saying about the role of governments and the role specifically in this country of the National Security Agency, the NSA. I mean, your point is that they have developed devices to fix these flaws that exist, but they haven't shared them quickly enough. Were you notified? Was Microsoft notified by NSA that this was coming?
Well, I don't want to go into the specifics of how we learned about this particular problem or by whom or when. It is a public record that we provided a patch in March. There wasn't a public statement about this until April. But what I think is also important is that we need the global community to come together. We called earlier this year for the creation, in effect, of a digital Geneva Convention, new rules of the road that apply to everybody, because this is an issue in this instance that may have arisen in the United States. But no one should think that this is an issue unique to the United States. This is an issue for many governments around the world.
Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft, we thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And some further reporting now on this and what consumers need to know, and that comes from William Brangham.
And for that, we turn to Eric Giller, who covers cybersecurity for Politico. Welcome.
Thank you.
So you just heard the president of Microsoft make his argument that they're not really to blame for this, for the slowness or relative slowness of putting out the patches. What do you make of that point he's making?
Well, Microsoft is in a tricky position here because, as you heard, he didn't want to discuss whether they had been informed by the NSA. It seems likely they were informed. The only other possibility is that they were told by this group that leaked the files. So either way, they're in a tricky situation. They've got to rush to fix this problem that they didn't know about. They're wondering whether they should demand some changes to the way the government deals with these policies. And of course, at the same time, they're wondering what the consequences are going to be for consumers. So they are in a tricky situation. I think they moved as fast as they could. Of course, what we're seeing is the more time you have to tell customers about the problem, the more customers who will fix it. They only had a very short period of time.
And obviously, we've been talking about this potential that this was somehow a tool created by the NSA that was stolen by hackers. And Microsoft is arguing that that's really the problem, that the government is devising tools to break into our computers. Inevitably, those tools are going to get out, and we're going to see the havoc we've seen. What do you make of that argument?
They certainly have a point that the U.S. government has not done a great job of keeping its secrets secret over the past few years. Edward Snowden, Harold Martin, who was recently arrested and charged with stealing classified information, the shadow brokers, we still don't know who they are. And then, of course, WikiLeaks has been posting CIA files. So, look, Microsoft has a point. The government is not as good at this as it should be. On the other hand, the government needs to be able to break into Russian computers, ISIS computers. You know, there are all kinds of valid foreign intelligence targets out there who are using Windows and who need to be surveilled by our government in order to do its job. So I think Microsoft is in a tricky spot because it doesn't want to say the government shouldn't be able to spy on terrorists, but those same terrorists, they use the products that we use. And so issues that allow them to be spied on, they also put us at risk.
Obviously, that seems like the trickiest part of the debate. If the government can detect that there is a hole in a company's software, do they have an obligation to tell that company so that they can patch it? But then that also gives away the tool that the government no longer has to do this exact surveillance you're describing.
Yeah, and the government has a process, I should say. They have a process for deciding when to reveal a flaw to a company. It's called the vulnerability equities process. And the government actually revealed it a few years ago when there was a major vulnerability that was disclosed in public. They still don't have all the fine-tuned details of that nailed down. And there's been some efforts. California Democrat Ted Lieu yesterday said, or I should say Friday, said that he wanted to reform that process. He wanted to change the rules for when the government has to tell a company about this. We're in the very early stages of this process. This is a very obscure issue. It's not one that people are familiar with, but it's one that I think, as we saw this weekend, it's becoming more important to our own lives.
Getting back to this attack itself, do you think, as we've been reporting, that this seems like it's winding down, or, as Judy mentioned, are we going to see more variants crop up?
It's hard to say because, as you point out, anybody can build a new variant. Anybody can change the code, put it back out there, and the ways of sort of killing it and tamping down on it, they have to be pursued freshly. They have to be pursued anew. And so it's possible that this never stops. I have a hard time imagining that cyber criminals will just keep doing this forever. They're going to find other things that they like to do, but there's certainly no technical reason that it can't happen forever.
We saw this break out first in hospitals in the UK. Is that because hospitals are particularly vulnerable, or was it because they were targeted specifically?
It's unclear right now. I think they were probably targeted. One sort of conspiracy theory here is that this wasn't meant to be released when it was, that it was a sort of a test. They were trying to figure out what would happen, and it got out. And perhaps the way it was initially configured, it ended up going to the National Health Service first. Either way, I would say probably not accidental. These things have to be coded. They've got to be targeted at particular entities. It's hard for me to imagine that the scale that we saw with the NHS, that was completely random. But I should say that U.S. officials and private cybersecurity firms have really, I think at this point, no idea who it is, although they are pursuing some leads.
Lastly, just for our viewers out there who are worried, could this strike me? What can I do to protect myself? Can you give us just a quick digital computer hygiene lesson? What are the things people should do to stop this from happening to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one thing is you want to patch Windows. If you're running Windows, and I think a lot of people out there are, make sure that you should be running Windows 10, which is
so when you get those software update notifications, do those.
Do them right away. You're much better off doing that and just, making sure that Microsoft is finding all the things that could go wrong, and just you got to install everything whenever it comes out there. And then also, I would say, if you're running Windows XP, and I hope to God that very few of your viewers are running Windows XP, but if you are, you should throw that computer away and get a new one as soon as possible, because Microsoft is not going to support these kinds of critical patches for Windows XP forever.
And of course, don't click on those dodgy-looking emails.
Absolutely.
Eric Giller of Politico, thanks so much.
Thank you.